to start talking about glands. Glands are still associated with the epithelial tissue that we covered in the previous section. Now, glands are going to be basically anything that's going to produce and secrete or release substances that have a very specific function. Now, there are different levels of glands in terms of how big or small they are, because you can have glandular cells, you can have glandular epithelium, or you can have organs all referred to as glands. And the big distinction is that they are going to produce and secrete those substances that they can then release to other places in the body. Now, specifically, when we talk about glands, there are two major categories of glands and how we're going to classify them. And we're going to classify them based on how they're going to release that substance that we're talking about. So the first one that you see listed over here is going to be an endocrine gland. Endo, as a root word, usually means on the inside. So with an endocrine gland, we're generally going to be referring to hormones. Hormones being released from different organs of the body. And then these hormones are going to hitch a ride in your bloodstream, and then they're going to go all over your body. So that way you're going to have systemic release of these hormones that are going to allow different parts of the body to respond to that particular hormone. Now, they're not going to just jump into the bloodstream. You're going to have some sort of organ that's producing this hormone. Then that hormone is going to be released to the interstitial fluid that's surrounding the cells, and then from there, from the interstitial fluid, it's going to be absorbed in through the blood. You don't have any particular ducts or tubes that the hormones are going to travel down to get to the blood. They're going to be released through exocytosis. So the cells will release that hormone through exocytosis into your interstitial fluid, moves it from the interstitial fluid into your blood, and then from there it's going to be able to go to all different parts of the body. The other major type of gland is going to be an exocrine gland. The distinction with an exocrine gland is that it is going to release a substance into one particular spot because it's going to have to travel through one duct or tube to get to that one spot. You are not going to be releasing into the bloodstream for it to go everywhere. It's just going to go to one particular area and very localized. So as you can see in this diagram here, you have these different endocrine cells, so those can also be called glandular cells, that are producing some sort of product, and then they're going to get released into the different parts of the body. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take those exocrine glands and we're going to classify them. So we're going to name them and group them based on their structure in this first one. That's why it shows anatomical. So structurally, when we are going to look at the exocrine gland, we can have, noticing at the top row, simple glands, or that bottom row, compound glands. So notice with simple glands, the simple glands are essentially going to have one single duct that is going to be releasing that secretion to one particular spot. So then we have their duct. So I do want you to notice the coloration that we have here. The gland cells that are actually producing the secretion are going to be shown in these pink cells. So those are our glandular cells making the stuff. The duct is going to be lined in this purple, which is basically an extension of the epithelial tissue. So all of this lining at the top here, this is all epithelial tissue and cells that are going to be there. So notice this top row, these are all going to be simple. We're also going to classify them based on the shape of these areas that are actually going to be releasing the substances. So those gland cells are going to be part of what we refer to as a pit. So the pit is this pink section that's going to contain all these gland cells that are producing the secretion. So the shape of the pit and then how many ducts you have is going to be how you classify it. So tubular, obviously this is going to be a tube-like shape. You also have a coiled shape that is still a single tube. You can have a branched tubular, so all of these are tubes, but they're all branched from a single duct. And alveolar or acinar, the alveolar or acinar are basically sphere-shaped, kind of like bulbs that are going to be on there. And then we have a simple branched alveolar. So we're looking at the shape with you have acinar and alveolar being basically spheres. You are going to have tubes, which are going to be long section. They can be coiled or they can be straight. And then here, these are all simple because there's only one single duct that the pit is going to be on. Now, when we look down here at the compound glands will have multiple ducts. So notice here's a duct, 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 goose. You will also have a bunch of different pits that are coming off of each of the different ducts. But the same thing, you are going to have tubular, you're going to have alveolar, also called acinar, that are going to be sphere-shaped, and then you basically put those words together. So structurally, you look at the glands, and then you put the words together that tell you if it's one duct or many ducts, and then what the actual shape of the pits are going to be. So that's our anatomical classification. Physiological or function of how we're going to classify the glands is also going to have a three-stage classification. So for this three-stage classification, it's based on how they're secreting the substances that they are producing. So remember, exocrine is only going to one particular place. So it's going to be a very specialized thing like earwax, digestive enzymes, things that need to only go into one particular location of your body. So the first type of secretion is merocrine secretion. Merocrine secretion is when you're going to have the cell creating the substance. It's going to put it into a secretory vesicle, and it's going to release it through exocytosis to go into that pit and then through that duct to go to wherever it needs. So the example that we are showing here, this is going to be our salivary gland, and it's going to make enzymes for the saliva. So those enzymes are made within the actual cell, released through a vesicle through exocytosis off the apical end of the epithelial tissue, and then it's deposited into that duct. Apocrine secretion is not going to be using exocytosis. What you're going to do is you are going to have, of course, the cells creating the actual substance itself, and then the cell is going to grow, and then it's going to shed off part of its cytoplasm and part of the whole cell. So this secretion happens where literally part of the cell breaks off, and then that's going to release the contents of it into that duct. And then the cell is going to regrow, and then again, it's going to break off more once you have enough of those vesicles that are accumulating on the apical end. When a female is lactating, they will create that milk through breaking down pieces of the cell that gets released into the duct. Holocrine secretion, though, is basically going to destroy the cell that created it. So with the holocrine secretion, notice we have this many-layered or stratified layer look to it. What you're going to have to do is take that superficial layer, and that superficial layer of cells are basically going to burst and release all of its contents to the duct that's going to be around it. You're going to keep on replacing them because you're going to have stem cells at the bottom of that stratified layer. So on the basal side, you're going to have the stem cells that are going to divide to create more and more cells, and then the cells are going to be destroyed in the process of releasing their secretions into the pit. So an example of that is going to be like your sebaceous glands, and sebaceous glands are going to be basically your oil glands that are associated with your hair. So our next group of tissue that we're looking at is the connective tissue. Now, if you look at this figure here, this figure is going to show you just a few of the different types of connective tissue that we have within our body. It is the most diverse type of tissue that we have within our body because there are so many different pieces that are actually considered connective tissue. But no matter what type of connective tissue you're looking at, whether it's this loose connective or cartilage or even blood over here, all connective tissue is going to have, number one, specialized cells. So there will be cells associated with that particular type of connective tissue that are going to produce specific, number two, extracellular protein fibers. Those protein fibers will be interwoven between the cells, and it's going to be created from the specialized cells themselves. Those cells are also going to create, number three, the ground substance. Ground substance is a fluid or a glue-like substance that the cell is going to release that's going to mix with those protein fibers in that extracellular space. And between the cells and that extracellular space that you have together, that's what you're going to create the tissues from. If you look at putting the proteins together with that ground substance, that's what we consider to be the matrix. The matrix makes up the bulk of connective tissue. So you do have cells in there, but most of the volume of connective tissue is actually formed from that matrix. And again, that matrix is all that fluid ground substance mixed together with the protein fibers. So those are the characteristics or the structures that associated with connective tissue. Now we're going to look at the functions of the connective tissue. So here's another slide that's showing a bunch of different types of connective tissue. So these are functions that are associated with all the different types of connective tissues. So number one, it provides a framework for your whole body. So looking at your body as a whole, structurally there's connective tissue going all the way around that's actually giving you your body's shape and holding it up. Connective tissue is also really important because it connects. It is going to be used as a transport system because it's connecting two other types of tissues to them. Now remember, we just covered epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue had that basal end to it because it had polarity, and so with that basal end it had that basement membrane being created, and that basement membrane was going to be created from cells on the epithelial tissue, but they're also going to be created, that basement membrane, in conjunction with the connective tissue as well. So the two of them together are going to create this basement membrane that's going to allow them to lock those two tissues into place. So the epithelial tissue will be attached to the connective tissue underneath it. The connective tissue then in turn is going to have another type of tissue underneath that, and it could be muscle, it could be bone, it could be whatever. But that is going to act as a transport system because you have to have a way of transporting things from the epithelium to the underlying muscle or bone that's going to be over there as well, or the nervous tissue that's in there. So fluids and dissolved materials are all going to use that connective tissue as a way, a means of moving from one place to another. Connective tissue is also going to protect your organs. It's going to act as a cushion around the organs and within the organs as well. And it's also going to support the organs. Your organs in your body cannot just float in space. They have to be resting in something. And generally that packing material or that supporting tissue is going to be connective tissue that's going to be holding them in place. It's also a really nice place for storage. In particular, our energy reserves are going to be kept in there, and a lot of times we can store energy in the form of triglycerides that our body can access later. And it's also really important for our defense in our body because there are many cells that are going to be used within the connective tissue that are going to help to combat invading microorganisms. Now, I mentioned that we have a very diverse group of connective tissue. If we look at our connective tissue as a whole, there are three main categories that we can classify those tissues into. So we can have connective tissue proper, which you see over here on the left. You also have connective tissue that's considered supportive connective tissue, and then we will have fluid connective tissues as well. We're going to look at each of these three groups separately, and then we're going to look at the different types in there. But for now, as a general overview, fluid connective tissue, this one is only showing blood, but blood as well as lymph are going to be considered fluid connective tissues. Our supportive connective tissues are going to be ones that give a lot of structure and framework to our body. So those are things going to be like bones and cartilage that are going to be in there. And as you can see, there are different types of bones and different types of cartilages as well. And then the biggest category is our connective tissue proper. So the proper connective tissue we can generally group into loose and dense connective tissues. Within our loose connective tissue, we'll have areolar tissue and adipose tissue. Our dense connective tissues are going to be things like our tendons, ligaments, and our white fibrous tissues. So all of these are different types of connective tissues that you have. So you should be able to identify the three major types and then any specific ones from those that I'm going to be covering in the next lecture.